Dog barks nonstop at the altar during Mass. What they find inside is terrifying. The ancient bells of St. Thomas Church tolled through the bitter December night, their somber echoes swallowed by the falling snow. Inside, Father Michael Anderson's evening Mass proceeded as usual until a bone-chilling howl pierced the sacred silence. Through the heavy oak doors came a large black dog, its fur matted with ice and one eye clouded with age. The beast limped straight to the altar, ignoring the gasps of the congregation. What disturbed Father Michael most wasn't the dog's sudden appearance, but its eyes that seemed to carry the weight of secrets darker than the winter night itself. Hey there, curious souls. Before we dive into this haunting tale from St. Thomas Church, take a moment to share where you're watching from and hit that like button. Let's connect through this spine-chilling story. For 15 years, Father Michael Anderson had carried the weight of a single night's failure. Before coming to St. Thomas Church, he'd served as a police chaplain in downtown Chicago, where the streets taught him that evil wore many faces, not all of them supernatural. On a winter night much like this one, he'd been called to assist with a troubled 12-year-old boy, Timothy Shaw. The child had been found in an abandoned church basement, surrounded by occult symbols and muttering in Latin. Rather than recognizing signs of abuse and trafficking, the young Father Michael had insisted on performing an exorcism. By morning, Timothy was dead not from demons, but from internal injuries inflicted by his captors. The investigation revealed a trafficking ring involving prominent figures in the city, but the evidence mysteriously disappeared. Father Michael's superiors quietly transferred him to St. Thomas, a modest parish in a small town where winter seemed eternal. The newspapers called it a tragedy. The police called it an accident. But in his prayers, Michael called it what it was, his greatest failure. Now at 45, his dark hair threaded with silver, Father Michael led his small congregation with a quiet determination. His homilies often spoke of redemption, though few knew he preached as much to himself as to them. The parishioners whispered about his habit of leaving the church doors unlocked at night, even in the coldest weather. For those who have nowhere else to go, he would say, though many suspected he waited for another lost child he might save. He developed a reputation for helping strays, both human and animal, earning him criticism from church officials who preferred their priests to focus on more traditional duties. But Michael had learned the hard way that evil thrived in darkness, and sometimes God's grace arrived on four legs or in the form of those society had abandoned. Every year, when winter's grip tightened around the town and the stained glass windows frosted over, Father Michael would light an extra candle beside the altar. Not for the saints or the souls of the departed, but for a young boy whose life might have been saved if someone had only looked closer at the darkness surrounding him. Tonight, as the black dog limped into his church, something stirred in Father Michael's memory, a detail from that terrible night years ago. Before he'd found Timothy in the basement, a police dog had been barking frantically at the church doors, trying to alert them. But they hadn't listened soon enough. Looking at this old, battle-worn creature now, Father Michael couldn't shake the feeling that God was offering him a second chance at redemption, though the price of that redemption remained to be seen. In his office, beneath a weathered crucifix, sat a file he'd never fully closed, newspaper clippings, police reports, and his own detailed notes about Timothy's case. Perhaps he thought it was time to reopen old wounds to prevent new ones from forming. But first there was the matter of the dog at his altar, whose arrival felt less like coincidence and more like divine intervention with each passing moment. Sarah Mitchell clutched her morning coffee at the back of St. Thomas Church, her reporter's notebook hidden beneath a worn Bible. At 38, her auburn hair tied back severely, she'd rebuilt her life in this small town after her husband's suspicious accident at the city attorney's office. David had been investigating a series of missing person cases when his car's brakes mysteriously failed. The official report called it mechanical failure. Sarah called it murder. Her 8-year-old son, Tommy, sat beside her in the pew, unusually quiet for a child his age. Since his father's death, he'd developed a peculiar sensitivity that sometimes frightened her. He saw things others didn't claim he could feel when bad things were about to happen. The local doctors suggested trauma-induced anxiety. Sarah wasn't so sure. "Mom," Tommy whispered, tugging her sleeve, "that dog, it's like the one in Daddy's picture." Sarah followed his gaze to the black dog at the altar. Her breath caught. David's last case had involved a retired police dog that had gone missing after a raid on an abandoned church. The dog had belonged to Detective James Cooper, who now sat 3 pews ahead, his broad shoulders tense beneath his weathered leather jacket. At 62, James Cooper was a legend in the K-9 unit before his forced retirement. His dog, Max, had been more than a partner. Together they'd broken open dozens of trafficking cases. Until that last raid, when Max had cornered a prominent judge in that dark church basement. The next day, Cooper was suspended, Max disappeared, and the judge was found dead in an apparent suicide. Cooper had spent the last 5 years trying to piece together what really happened that night. The retired detective attended Mass every Sunday, though Sarah suspected he came more for observation than devotion. Like her, he kept detailed notes, names, dates, connections that seemed random until you looked closer. They'd never spoken directly, but Sarah had noticed how his eyes followed her son, especially when Tommy had his feelings. Also watching the scene unfold was Eleanor Burke, the church secretary whose perfectly manicured nails and designer scarves seemed at odds with the parish secretary's salary. She stood near the vestibule, phone in hand, lips pressed into a thin line as she watched the dog. Sarah had seen her making late-night calls to unlisted numbers, speaking in hushed tones about maintaining appearances and keeping things quiet. The dog, old and battle-scarred, seemed to watch them all with an unsettling intelligence. Its clouded eye was fixed on the altar, while the good eye scanned the congregation. When it passed over Tommy, the boy grabbed his mother's hand. "He remembers," Mom, Tommy whispered. "He remembers everything." Sarah squeezed her son's hand, feeling the familiar chill of a story unfolding, one that would either bring the justice she'd sought or put them all in grave danger. In her pocket, her phone held photos of documents she'd received anonymously, suggesting a connection between her husband's death, Cooper's last case, and something hidden beneath St. Thomas Church. What that connection was, she wasn't yet sure. But as the dog's howl echoed through the sacred space, she knew they were about to find out. The wind howled outside St. Thomas Church as Father Michael raised the host. "Take this, all of you, and eat of it." His words were cut short by Max's sudden, aggressive barking. The dog had been quietly watching the altar for hours, but something about this moment triggered a violent reaction. "Someone remove that beast!" Eleanor Burke's voice cut through the chaos, her designer scarf fluttering as she gestured dramatically. Several parishioners moved to grab Max, but the dog evaded them with surprising agility for his age. "He's trying to tell us something," Tommy called out. Breaking free from Sarah's grasp, he ran toward Max, ignoring his mother's desperate reach. "Tommy!" No, Sarah's voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, but her son had already reached the dog. Instead of aggression, Max's demeanor softened. He gently nuzzled Tommy's hand while maintaining his alert stance toward the altar. Detective Cooper stood slowly, his experienced eyes narrowing. "That's no ordinary barking," he muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "That's how they signal when they found something." Father Michael lowered the host, a shadow crossing his face. The temperature in the church seemed to drop suddenly, and the candles flickered despite the absence of a breeze. He'd seen this before the night Timothy died. The same unexplainable cold, the same warning from a dog they'd ignored. "Please," Eleanor stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet but eyes sharp as steel. "Father, we can't let this disruption continue. Think of the congregation's safety." But Father Michael noticed how her gaze kept darting to a specific spot near the altar steps. Tommy stood there now, one hand on Max's head, the other pointing to the floor. "There's something under here," the boy said, his voice carrying uncertainty that sent chills through the assembly. "Something bad." The congregation erupted in whispers. Some began gathering their things to leave, while others drew closer, curiosity overcoming fear. Sarah pulled out her reporter's notebook, recording every detail, every reaction. "This is God's house," Father Michael's voice cut through the chaos, steady and clear. "And perhaps he has sent us a guardian to reveal what needs to be revealed." He stepped down from the altar, his vestments swaying with each deliberate step. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her perfectly composed face cracking for just a moment. "Father, I've contacted the diocese. They're sending someone to handle this situation." "How interesting," Sarah spoke up, her reporter's instincts firing, "that you have such direct access to the diocese on a Sunday morning." The tension in the church grew thicker. Max's barking had become a low, continuous growl, his eyes fixed on the spot Tommy had indicated. Outside, the winter storm intensified, rattling the stained glass windows like imprisoned spirits demanding release. Father Michael reached the spot where Tommy stood. Kneeling down, he ran his hands over the ancient stone flooring. His fingers caught on something, a slight irregularity in the pattern, invisible to the eye but clear to the touch. The same type of hidden seam he'd found in that basement years ago, before everything went wrong. "Tom," he called to the elderly caretaker, "bring me a crowbar." The crowbar's metal scraped against ancient stone, echoing through the now silent church. Father Michael worked methodically, memories of another hidden chamber flashing through his mind. Behind him, Max's growls grew deeper, more urgent. Father Eleanor stepped forward, her Gucci heels clicking on the stone floor. "The diocese explicitly stated we should wait." "The diocese isn't here," Sarah interrupted, her phone recording discreetly. "But whatever's under that stone has been waiting a long time to be found." Detective Cooper moved closer, his trained eye studying the scene. "That's not just any seam pattern," he muttered. "It's the same design we found in the basement." Where he stopped, glancing at Max, realization dawning on his weathered face. The stone finally gave way with a sound like a dying breath. Stale air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying the metallic scent of old blood and something else, something that made the candles flicker and the crosses on the walls seem to darken. Tommy stepped back, clutching his mother's hand. "It's angry," he whispered. "What's down there is really angry." Father Michael shone his flashlight into the opening. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the walls lined with symbols that made his blood run cold. He recognized them from Timothy's case, marks of ritual sacrifice and corruption. "This is outrageous," Eleanor's voice shook slightly. "You're destroying church property. I'm calling security." "Interesting choice of words, Mrs. Burke," Detective Cooper cut in. "Most parishes have custodians, not security." The tension was broken by a metallic glint catching Father Michael's flashlight beam. Something was reflecting back from the bottom of the stairs, something that looked disturbingly like a chain. "Nobody goes down there until proper authorities," Eleanor began, but Max suddenly lunged forward, nearly pulling Tommy with him. The dog's bark had changed from warning to urgency. "He knows," Tommy said softly. "He was there before, when they hurt people." Sarah's reporter instincts blazed. "Tommy, what do you mean before?" But before the boy could answer, a gust of wind howled through the church, extinguishing every candle simultaneously. In the sudden darkness, only Father Michael's flashlight illuminated the scene, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The beam caught Eleanor's face as she whispered into her phone, her composed mask cracking. "It's happening again. They found it. Send them now." The sound of distant sirens grew steadily louder, but they weren't police sirens. They were different private security coming fast. Father Michael made a decision. "Detective Cooper, Sarah, Tommy with me, now." The dog, too, Tommy insisted, his small hand buried in Max's fur. They descended the stairs quickly, Father Michael leading with his flashlight. Behind them, Eleanor's voice rang out, "Stop them. Don't let them reach the bottom." But it was too late. The beam of light had already revealed what lay in the chamber below, a sight that would shake their faith, confirm their worst fears, and set in motion events that would expose decades of buried secrets and corruption. The first thing they saw was the chest bound in ancient chains and marked with Latin inscriptions. The second was the fresh footprints in the dust leading to it. Someone had been down here recently. Very recently. Our brave Max, this wounded warrior, deserves a like for his unwavering loyalty in exposing the dark truth beneath St. Thomas Church. Sadly, no one has given him that recognition yet. Will you be the first to show your support? The chamber's air grew heavier with each step toward the chained chest. Father Michael's flashlight beam revealed walls covered in Latin inscriptions, prayers mixed with darker verses he didn't dare read aloud. The dust swirled around their feet, disturbed for the first time in decades, except for those fresh footprints leading to and from the chest. "Max knows this place," Detective Cooper whispered, watching his former partner's behavior. The old dog moved with purpose, sniffing the ground systematically, the same search pattern they'd used in countless investigations. This is where he disappeared that night. Sarah kept Tommy close, her reporter's eye cataloging every detail. "These chains," she noted, "they're not just for locking. Look at the symbols, they're meant to contain something." The chest itself was massive, made of dark wood bound with iron. What caught Father Michael's attention wasn't its size, but the inscriptions carved into its surface. He recognized one phrase immediately: "Custodiet in perpetuum guard forever." "Tommy, stay back," Sarah warned, but her son was already speaking. "It's like the box in Daddy's pictures," he said quietly. "The one he found before he stopped," his young face clouding with memory. Detective Cooper's head snapped up. "What pictures?" Before Sarah could respond, Max's behavior changed dramatically. The old dog positioned himself between Tommy and the chest, his growl becoming deeper, more threatening. The temperature seemed to drop further, their breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. "We need to open it," Father Michael declared, studying the chain's complex arrangement. "Whatever's been happening in this town, all the missing people, the covered-up deaths, Timothy's case, David's accident, it's all connected to what's in here." From above, they heard Eleanor's voice growing closer, accompanied by multiple footsteps. "They're down here. Hurry." Sarah pulled out a small camera. "Whatever we find, the world needs to see it this time. No more cover-ups." Father Michael found the main lock, ancient but well-maintained, recently used by the look of the oil on its mechanism. As he touched it, a jolt of energy ran through his body, the same sensation he'd felt that night with Timothy. "James," he said to Cooper, "help me with this." The retired detective moved forward, pulling out a set of picks from his jacket. "Some skills you never forget," he muttered, working on the lock while Max kept watch on the stairs. The lock clicked open with an almost musical sound. As they unwound the chains, a low humming filled the chamber, like distant chanting. Tommy pressed closer to his mother, trembling. "They're angry," he whispered. "The ones they hurt. They're all here." The final chain fell away. Father Michael grasped the heavy lid, saying a quick prayer. Cooper positioned himself ready, years of police training evident in his stance. Sarah raised her camera. The lid creaked open. The beam of the flashlight illuminated the contents, and Sarah's camera flashed, documenting everything. Inside lay rows of carefully preserved ledgers, their pages filled with names, dates, and amounts. Beneath them, photographs, hundreds of them, showing faces of the missing, the murdered, the forgotten, and at the bottom something that made Father Michael's blood run cold, a familiar clerical collar, stained with blood. "That's Bishop Morrison's," he breathed. "The one who disappeared after speaking out against corruption in the diocese 20 years ago." Cooper picked up one of the ledgers, his hand shaking slightly. "These are payment records. bribes, blackmail. My God, it goes back decades. But it was what lay beneath the collar that would change everything. A single photograph showing a group of robed figures standing over an altar. Among them, clearly visible, was Eleanor Burke, 20 years younger but unmistakable. And beside her, wearing his judicial robes, was the man Sarah recognized instantly, the judge who'd ruled her husband's death an accident. Above them, the footsteps grew closer. Time was running out. Seal the entrance, Cooper's command cut through the darkness. Father Michael and Sarah quickly pushed a heavy storage cabinet against the narrow stairway while Tommy clutched Max, who stood guard, hackles raised. Through the barricade, Eleanor's voice rang with unexpected authority. "Father Anderson, you're interfering with matters beyond your understanding. There are forces at work here." Forces like the ones that killed my husband. Sarah's voice shook with controlled rage. Or the ones that made Max disappear after he found something he shouldn't. The flashlight beam caught more documents spilling from the chest. Tommy suddenly pointed to a familiar name. "Mom, look, that's Mrs. Burke's real name. She changed it. The paper revealed Eleanor had once been Eleanor Morrison, the bishop's sister." A heavy impact shook their barricade. Professional security by the sound of it. Father Michael quickly photographed crucial documents with his phone while Cooper gathered key evidence into his jacket. "There's another way out," Tommy whispered, his hand buried in Max's fur. "The dog remembers. Behind the far wall." Cooper's flashlight revealed what they'd missed: subtle tool marks on the chamber's back wall. "The maintenance tunnels," he muttered. "Every old church has them. This is how they've been accessing the chamber." Another crash against the barricade. Wood splintered. Father Michael, Eleanor's voice had lost all pretense of refinement. "Think of your position. The church can be very generous to those who understand discretion, or very unforgiving to those who don't." The priest's hands trembled as he pushed against the false wall panel. "Like you were unforgiving to Timothy," his voice carried years of suppressed anger. "Or to Bishop Morrison when he discovered what you were doing." The panel gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel. Sarah quickly ushered Tommy through, followed by Max, who seemed to know the route. "You don't understand," Eleanor shouted as the barricade began to give way. "We protected the church's reputation. Everything we did was for the greater good." The greater good. Cooper's voice was ice. "Is that what you told yourself when you had David Mitchell killed? When you made Max disappear? When you silenced a child?" The barricade crashed open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as armed security poured in. But they were seconds too late. The group had slipped into the tunnel, sealing it behind them. As they hurried through the darkness, guided by Max's uncanny memory, Sarah clutched the evidence against her chest. "Where does this lead?" "The old cemetery," Cooper replied. "These tunnels were used during Prohibition. I mapped them all after Max disappeared, hoping." Tommy stopped suddenly, pressing against a wall. "Someone's coming from ahead." They doused their lights, holding their breath. Footsteps approached from both directions now. They were trapped. Father Michael felt the weight of Timothy's death, of years of silence. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "the truth comes out this time. All of it." Sarah squeezed his arm in the darkness. "It already has. I've been live streaming since we entered the chamber. Everything they said, everything we found, thousands are watching right now." A slow clap echoed through the tunnel. A familiar voice spoke from the darkness ahead. "Impressive, Mrs. Mitchell. Very impressive." The beam of a powerful flashlight blinded them. "But did you really think we wouldn't have contingencies for this exact situation?" The figure stepped forward, and Father Michael felt his world tilt. There, wearing the proud smile of a chess master about to call checkmate, stood Archbishop Williams, his mentor, the man who had transferred him to St. Thomas after Timothy's death. "Michael, my boy," the Archbishop said softly, "you should have left the past buried. Now we'll have to bury it again, along with all of you." Behind them, Eleanor's security team closed in. Max growled, positioning himself between Tommy and the approaching threats. The tunnel suddenly felt like a tomb. But Tommy, his young face serene in the harsh flashlight beam, simply smiled. "You forgot something," he said calmly. "God doesn't like secrets." And then the real miracles began. The first miracle was the simplest. Every flashlight in the tunnel died simultaneously, plunging them into total darkness. The second was Max's bark, which echoed with an almost supernatural resonance, causing the tunnel walls to vibrate. "Impossible," the Archbishop whispered. "Those symbols were meant to contain." Contain what? Father Michael's voice cut through the darkness. The truth, or something worse. In the pitch blackness, Tommy's small hand found Max's fur, guiding the group while their pursuers stumbled in confusion. The boy seemed to navigate with an otherworldly certainty. "Mom," he whispered, "Max says we need to reach the old chapel. That's where Daddy found it." Sarah's breath caught. The last text David had sent her before his accident mentioned an abandoned chapel. She'd discovered its location in his files but never dared visit. As they moved, Cooper quietly filled in crucial gaps. "David contacted me 3 days before he died. Said he'd found financial records linking the diocese to offshore accounts. Money from trafficking, blackmail, stolen religious artifacts. But it went deeper than that." A distant rumble of thunder shook the tunnel. Winter storms didn't usually have thunder. "The rituals," Father Michael added grimly. "They weren't just for show, were they?" Eleanor and her group believed in something darker. "Bishop Morrison discovered it," Cooper continued. "He found evidence of actual ceremonies. Children missing from church orphanages. Wealthy parishioners paying for special blessings. Max and I tracked one case to that church basement where Timothy—" He couldn't finish. They all understood. Sarah's reporter instincts pieced it together. So they created a perfect system. The rituals gave them power over their wealthy victims' blackmail material. Those who wouldn't pay had accidents. The money went through church accounts cleaned by donations, and anyone who investigated disappeared. Tommy finished softly. "Like the people in the pictures. Like Daddy." They emerged into a larger chamber. Moonlight filtered through a broken stained glass window, illuminating rows of empty pews covered in years of dust. The old chapel, abandoned but not forgotten. Max's behavior changed instantly. He circled a specific spot near the altar, the same focused search pattern from his police days. Cooper watched with professional recognition. "This is where he was leading us that night," the detective said. "Before they took him. Before they trapped him in those tunnels." Sarah's camera flashed as she documented the scene. On the walls, behind years of grime, familiar symbols emerged, the same ones from the chamber beneath St. Thomas. Father Michael approached the altar, his hands trembling slightly. Timothy wasn't their first victim. This was their original site, before they moved operations to St. Thomas. But why change locations? "Because of what's buried here," Tommy said, his voice carrying that unsettling certainty. "The real evidence. The stuff even scarier than the books we found." A crash echoed from the tunnel behind them. Eleanor's security team had regained their bearings. "Split up," Cooper commanded. "Sarah, take Tommy and the evidence. Get to the street, go public. Father, you and I need to find what they're so desperate to keep hidden." But before they could move, a new voice joined them, calm, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Judge Harrison stepped from the shadows, flanked by 2 armed men. The same judge who'd ruled David's death an accident. The same one from the photograph in the chest. "You see," he continued smoothly, "we've invested too much, sacrificed too much, to let it all unravel now. The old ways must be preserved. Power must be maintained." even if it means killing children. Sarah's voice shook with rage. The judge smiled coldly. My dear, especially then. Their innocence makes the rituals more effective. Max's growl turned into something else, a sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Tommy placed his hand on the dog's head, and for a moment, both their eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. You forgot the most important thing, the boy said, in a voice that carried echoes of others. God sees everything, even in the dark. The temperature plunged. The moonlight through the broken window took on an unnatural hue, and from the shadows of the chapel, figures began to emerge, translucent, glowing forms of children, adults, all the victims whose evidence lay in that chest. Among them, clearly visible, stood Bishop Morrison and David Mitchell. The judge's composure cracked. This is impossible. The containment symbols only work if there's no innocent blood on holy ground. Father Michael finished, understanding flooding his face. You buried your victims in consecrated earth. You turned their resting place into your vault of secrets. But sacred ground remembers, and so do they. The spectral figures moved closer, their faces both peaceful and terrible in their justice. From the tunnel came sounds of Eleanor's security team fleeing in terror. But it wasn't over. As Judge Harrison backed away, his fear turned to something else, a dark determination. From his coat, he drew an ancient book bound in black leather. If they want to play with old powers, he snarled, then let's remind them why people feared the dark in the first place. He began to read, and the shadows in the chapel started to move with purpose. The real battle for St. Thomas Church was about to begin. The shadows coalesced into writhing tendrils as Judge Harrison's Latin incantations filled the chapel. The temperature dropped further, frost crystallizing on the broken stained glass. Sarah pushed Tommy behind a pillar, her maternal instincts warring with her journalist's compulsion to document everything. Keep streaming, she whispered, pressing her phone into his hands. The world needs to see. Father Michael stepped forward, his voice steady despite his fear. Harrison, stop this madness. You're in a house of God. God, the judge laughed bitterly. Where was God when we built this city's wealth, when we secured our power? The old ways brought us everything: wealth, influence, protection. Your God was silent while we prospered. Cooper had positioned himself near Max, his tactical training evident. And how many lives did your prosperity cost? How many families destroyed? The shadows were taking form, now vaguely humanoid shapes with too many angles, too many limbs. The spectral victims retreated before them, their light dimming. Progress demands sacrifice, Harrison replied. Eleanor understood that. So did the Archbishop. Even your precious Bishop Morrison eventually saw reason before he became difficult. Sarah's voice cut through the darkness. Is that what you told yourself when you ordered my husband's death? When you sanctioned killing children? The judge's face contorted. Your husband was a fool who couldn't leave well enough alone. Just like Morrison. Just like this meddlesome priest. The old powers demand balance, a soul for a blessing, blood for fortune. Tommy's small voice carried a wisdom beyond his years. But the souls remember. And they're not afraid anymore. As if in response, the spectral figures grew brighter. Bishop Morrison's ghost stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous anger. David Mitchell's spirit moved to stand near his wife and son. Harrison's shadows recoiled from the light, but the judge merely smiled. Ah, yes, the souls of the sanctified. But you forget we've had decades to perfect our craft. He pulled something from his coat, a worn leather pouch. Inside was dark soil stained with old blood. Desecrated earth from unconsecrated graves, he explained, scattering it in a circle. The perfect binding agent. The shadows solidified, pushing back against the spirit's light. The temperature dropped so low their breath crystallized in the air. Father Michael felt the weight of his failures pressing down. Timothy's death. his years of silence. But as he watched Tommy holding Sarah's phone, still streaming truth to the world, he understood what had to be done. The detective he called to Cooper, "Get him out." "I'll handle this." Like hell, Sarah interrupted. "We finish this together. For David. For all of them." Max suddenly barked a sharp, urgent sound. Cooper's eyes widened in recognition. "He's found something," the detective said. "Under the altar. That's what he was trying to show us that night." Tommy nodded. "There's a box, like the other one, but older. That's where it started, where they first learned the bad words." Harrison's confident smile faltered slightly. "Impossible. We moved everything when." But Max was already clawing at the altar's base, revealing ancient stonework identical to St. Thomas Church. The judge's incantation grew more urgent. The shadows pressed closer, forcing their group toward the altar. Outside, thunder cracked again, unnatural in the winter night. "Mom, Tommy," whispered, "Max says we need to break it. The box corrupts the holy ground. That's how they control the spirits." Sarah looked to Cooper and Father Michael. A silent understanding passed between them. Harrison, Father Michael called, drawing the judge's attention. "You want to talk about old powers? Let me tell you about the oldest power of all." He stepped forward, holding his cross before him. The shadows hissed and withdrew slightly. "Greater love hath no man than this," Michael began, his voice growing stronger, "that a man lay down his life for his friends." The spectral figures grew brighter at his words. Harrison's shadows wavered. "What are you doing?" the judge demanded. "Reminding them of love," Tommy answered simply. "The thing your dark words can't touch." While Harrison was distracted, Cooper and Sarah had reached the altar. Max showed them exactly where to strike the stone. The judge realized too late what was happening. "Stop them," he commanded the shadows. "Kill 'em all." But as Cooper's crowbar struck the hidden panel, as Sarah's camera flashed, capturing every moment, as Tommy's live stream broadcast truth to thousands, something extraordinary happened. The spirits of the dead, led by Bishop Morrison and David Mitchell, formed a circle of light around them. The shadows couldn't penetrate their protective barrier. The panel cracked. Inside lay an ancient box covered in familiar symbols, the source of Harrison's power, the beginning of decades of corruption and death. No, Harrison's voice held real fear now. "You don't understand what you're doing." But they did understand, and as Max lunged for the box, as Tommy raised the phone to capture everything, as Sarah and Cooper moved to guard Father Michael, they knew this wasn't just about exposing corruption. This was about redemption, about justice, about proving that even in the darkest places, light could still shine. The true test of their faith was about to begin. The ancient box shattered under Max's powerful jaws, releasing a sound like 1,000 whispered prayers. Darkness erupted from the fragments, but this wasn't Harrison's controlled shadows. This was raw, primal power, decades of corrupted faith breaking free. "You fools," Harrison screamed, his cultured facade cracking completely. "That box was the only thing containing the consequences of our work." The chapel walls trembled. Through the broken stained glass, black snow began to fall, not natural snow, but crystallized manifestations of decades of dark rituals. Father Michael staggered as memories flooded his mind, not just Timothy's death, but hundreds of others. The box had held not just power, but memories, evidence, the very essence of countless tragic ends. "Mom," Tommy's voice cut through the chaos. "The spirits they're remembering." The spectral figures surrounding them were changing. Bishop Morrison's ghost clutched his throat, reliving his murder. David Mitchell's spirit reached toward his family, showing the sabotaged brake lines that ended his life. Each victim's death played out in haunting detail. Sarah kept filming, tears streaming down her face as she finally witnessed her husband's last moments. "The world needs to know," she whispered. "All of it." Cooper had positioned himself between Harrison and the group, his police training evident even against supernatural threats. "Max," he commanded, "protect the boy." The old dog pressed against Tommy, who buried his hands in Max's fur. The child's eyes were wide but unafraid. "They're not angry anymore," he said. "They're sad. They just want to be remembered." Harrison began laughing, a horrible, unhinged sound. "Remembered? Oh, they'll be remembered, but not as victims, as participants." He pulled something else from his coat, a bone-white whistle carved with dark symbols. "You think that dog is the only one who can call to the other side." The whistle's sound pierced their souls. From the shattered box's remains, dark figures began to rise, not the victims, but the ones who had performed the rituals. Corrupt priests, wealthy power brokers, dark servants who had willingly participated in decades of evil. You see, Harrison's voice held a maniacal edge. Every ritual has two sides, those who are sacrificed, and those who make the sacrifice, and they never truly leave this place. The dark figures moved with purpose, pushing back against the victim spirits. The chapel became a battlefield between light and shadow, between justice and corruption, between memory and enforced forgetting. Father Michael stepped forward, his cross held high. "In the name of God." "Your God?" Harrison sneered. "Where was he when we built our empire? When we turned this sacred ground into a foundation of power? Face it, Michael, if he was real, he would have stopped us long ago." But Tommy's voice rang out, clear and pure. "He did try to stop you. He sent Max." The old dog's fur began to glow softly, and suddenly they understood. Every victim, every murder, every dark ritual, Max had been there, trying to save them. The loyal K-9 officer who disappeared wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, heaven sent, working through earthly means to expose the darkness. That's why they trapped him in the tunnels, Cooper realized, his voice breaking. He wasn't just finding evidence, he was protecting sacred ground. Harrison's dark practitioners pressed closer, but wherever Max moved, their power seemed to waver. The dog's clouded eye now shone with inner light, while his good eye remained alert and watchful, 1 foot in each world, serving both justice and mercy. "It doesn't matter," Harrison snarled. "One divine dog against decades of power, against all the souls we bound to our cause. Even heaven's pets can die." He raised his hands, beginning a new incantation. The dark snow fell heavier, each flake burning where it touched. The chapel's very foundation seemed to groan under the weight of accumulated evil. Sarah pulled Tommy closer, still streaming everything. "Keep filming, baby. Whatever happens, keep filming." Father Michael felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down. This was Timothy's basement all over again, evil rising, innocence threatened, his faith feeling inadequate against the darkness. But then he saw something that changed everything. Through the broken window, beyond the black snow, lights were appearing in the darkness. Dozens, then hundreds of people were gathering, holding candles. The live stream had drawn them, not just viewers, but believers. Regular people coming to take a stand. Their light pushed back against the dark snow. Their prayers, spoken in countless languages and faiths, began to drown out Harrison's incantations. "No," the judge howled. "The old powers cannot be overcome by simple faith." Simple faith, Tommy smiled, his hand still buried in Max's glowing fur. "There's nothing simple about it, and they didn't come just to pray." Through the crowd came police cars, FBI vehicles, news vans. Sarah's live stream had reached the right people. The evidence was out. The truth could no longer be buried. Harrison's dark practitioners began to waver as flashlights and spotlights joined the candles, pushing back the shadows, but the judge himself wasn't finished. "If I fall," he snarled, raising a dark dagger, "I'm taking God's precious guardians with me." He lunged toward Tommy, the ritual blade aimed at the boy's heart. Max leaped to intercept as he had done countless times before. But this time something was different. This time all the spirits of the dead moved as one. As Harrison's dagger plunged toward Tommy, time seemed to slow. The spirits of every victim, children, whistleblowers, innocents merged with Max's glowing form. The old dog became a beacon of pure light, each soul adding its own radiance to his earthly vessel. No, Harrison's blade struck the light and shattered. Bishop Morrison's voice echoed through Max. You forgot the first rule of consecrated ground, Judge Harrison. The blood of martyrs only makes it holier. The combined spirits surged through Max, transforming him. His aged body stood straight, wounds healed, both eyes now blazing with divine purpose. When he barked, it carried the voice of every victim. Enough. The dark practitioners scattered like smoke in wind. Harrison stumbled backward, his power crumbling. But he wasn't finished. From his coat he pulled one final item, a small red book bound in human skin. If I can't have power, he screamed, no one will. Daemon vinculum aeternum. The chapel floor cracked. Dark energy poured from the fissures, wrapping around Harrison like a cocoon. His body began to change, twisted by the very forces he'd served. Father Michael grabbed Tommy and Sarah. Everyone out. Now. No, Tommy said firmly, his small hand still in Max's fur. This is why we're here. All of us. Cooper understood first. The live stream, the witnesses outside, the holy ground. It's not just about exposing them. It's about redemption. Father Michael finished, decades of guilt lifting from his shoulders. Tommy, what do we do? The boy looked at Max, then at the spirits swirling around them. We remind them of love, the real kind, the kind that saves people. Sarah's camera captured everything as Tommy stepped forward, Max at his side. The boy's voice rang with innocent clarity. Judge Harrison, I forgive you. The dark energy faltered. Bishop Morrison forgives you. Mr. Cooper forgives you. Even Max forgives you. Harrison's transformation slowed, his twisted form shuddering. My daddy, he forgives you too. The judge screamed not in rage, but in raw anguish. The darkness around him began to crack, light seeping through. Father Michael raised his cross, understanding at last. This is the true power of sacred ground. Not ritual, not sacrifice, forgiveness. The spirits around Max began to sing an ancient hymn of mercy. Outside, the crowd caught the melody, hundreds of voices joining in harmony. The dark snow turned to pure light. Harrison fell to his knees, human again, broken. How he sobbed. After everything we did. Because that's what light does, Tommy said simply. It doesn't hate the dark. It just shines. The red book crumbled to ash. The fissures in the floor sealed themselves. Around them the spirits began to fade, not in fear or pain, but in peace. Their stories had been told. Their deaths had meaning. Justice would come. David Mitchell's spirit kissed his wife and son one last time before joining the others. Bishop Morrison nodded to Father Michael, forgiveness in his eyes. One by one, the victims ascended, their light blessing the chapel one final time. Max's glow dimmed gradually, leaving him once again an old dog with a clouded eye, but his purpose was clear. He'd been a guardian not just of justice, but of hope. Harrison's dark whistle lay broken beside him. Sarah picked it up carefully. Evidence, she said, for those who need earthly proof. Outside, sirens wailed closer. The FBI would find the ledgers, the photos, the money trails. Harrison's empire would face human justice. But the deeper justice had already been served. Cooper knelt beside Max, tears in his eyes. Good boy, he whispered. The best boy. The old dog wagged his tail once, then turned to Tommy. The boy smiled. "He can rest now," Tommy said. "They all can." Father Michael looked at the broken altar, the shattered box, the dawn light starting to pierce the winter clouds. "The church will need to heal from this. We all will." "We'll help," Sarah said firmly. "All of us. The truth may hurt, but healing can't come without it." Harrison looked up, his face aged decades in minutes. "Why," he asked Tommy, "why forgive?" The boy considered this, his hand gentle on Max's head. "Because carrying hate is heavy, and there's already too much heavy stuff in the world." The first FBI agents entered the chapel, followed by news crews. The earthly aftermath was beginning, but something fundamental had changed in that sacred space. The old powers of darkness had been broken not by greater darkness, but by simple light, by truth, by forgiveness, by love. Max sat guard as Harrison was led away in handcuffs, his tail thumping softly against the ancient stone floor. His job wasn't finished. There would always be darkness to guard against, but tonight light had won. Tommy looked up at his mother. "Can we keep him?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Pretty sure he's keeping us, baby." The winter sun rose fully, streaming through the broken window. Where the dark snow had fallen, flowers were beginning to grow in December against all odds. But then again, Father Michael thought, watching Tommy and Max walk together toward the dawn, faith had always been about believing in things that seemed impossible. Sometimes it just needed a faithful dog to show the way. Dear friends, while we delve into this powerful story of redemption and justice at St. Thomas Church, I'm touched by how deeply it's moving our community. If you'd like to join us on more emotional journeys like Max's tale, please consider subscribing. Your support means the world to us. The peace was shattered by Eleanor's voice, sharp and desperate, from the chapel entrance. "If we fall, no evidence survives." She held a remote detonator, her designer scarf now dirty and torn. "This entire building is rigged. Years of planning don't end this easily." Behind her, the Archbishop nodded grimly. "My child," he addressed Tommy, "some stories aren't meant to have happy endings." Max reacted instantly, his old police training kicking in. He lunged toward Eleanor, but age had slowed him. His clouded eye couldn't track her movement as she dodged. The tunnels, Cooper shouted, understanding dawning on his face. They weren't just for access, they're packed with. The explosion started deep below, a rumble that shook the foundations. Father Michael grabbed Tommy as the floor began to crack. Sarah's live stream caught everything as the ancient chapel started to collapse. Max Tommy screamed as debris rained down. The old dog was cornered between Eleanor and a widening chasm in the floor. Cooper moved to help his former partner, but Max barked sharply, the same command bark from their K-9 unit days. "Stay back." "You noble fool," Eleanor sneered at the dog. "Still trying to save everyone, just like when you found our operation all those years ago." The Archbishop's face showed a flicker of regret. The dog was supposed to die in those tunnels. Some loyalty can't be broken, only buried. Max stood his ground as the chapel continued to crumble. His body, briefly transformed by divine light, now showed every year of his age. But his good eye held the same determination it had shown on countless police missions. "Mom," Tommy whispered, "he's saying goodbye." Sarah tried to hold her son back, but the boy broke free. He ran toward Max, heedless of the falling stones. Time slowed. Eleanor's finger tightened on the secondary detonator. The Archbishop reached for Tommy. Max made his choice. With the last of his strength, the old dog leaped. His body slammed into Tommy, pushing the boy clear of the falling debris. In that same moment, he knocked Eleanor off balance. The detonator skittered across the floor, right into the chasm. The Archbishop lunged for it, but too late. The device fell into the darkness below. No, Eleanor's scream was cut short as Max's weight carried them both toward the edge. Her designer heels slipped on the crumbling stone. Cooper's anguished cry echoed through the chapel. Max, no. The old dog turned his head one last time. His clouded eyes seemed to clear for a moment, meeting Tommy's gaze. In that look was every ounce of love, loyalty, and sacrifice that had defined his life. Then the floor gave way. Max, Eleanor, and the last physical evidence of decades of corruption plunged into the darkness below. The Archbishop, trying to reach them, lost his balance and followed. Tommy's scream of denial joined the thunder of collapsing stone. Father Michael pulled him back as more of the chapel floor disintegrated. Above the chaos, a single beam of winter sunlight broke through the dust, illuminating the spot where a faithful guardian had made his final stand. The dust settled over broken stone and shattered faith. Through the gaping hole in the chapel floor, winter wind carried the echoes of distant sirens. Tommy stood motionless, staring at the spot where Max had disappeared. He knew, the boy whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. He knew all along this was how it would end. Sarah held her son, her camera still recording, capturing not just evidence now, but testimony to sacrifice. Even in his final moments, Max had ensured the live stream would continue, that truth would survive. Father Michael knelt in the debris, his vestments gray with dust. His hands trembled as he picked up Max's worn police collar, torn loose in the final struggle. The tag still bore his badge number, dulled by years in the tunnels, but never surrendered. Greater love hath no man, his voice broke. Cooper stood at the edge of the abyss, his weathered face carved with grief. 15 years. 15 years I searched for him, and in the end he couldn't finish. The FBI teams were securing the scene, documenting everything. But they stepped carefully around Tommy as he laid his small hand on the last spot he'd seen his friend. "He's not gone," Tommy said softly. "Not really." Sarah started to comfort him, but stopped. There was something different in her son's voice, not the denial of grief, but certainty. The spirits, Father Michael realized, they're still here. As if in response, the winter wind changed. Through the broken window came not just light, but a familiar presence. Max's paw prints appeared in the dust, leading from the abyss to Tommy's feet. Not physical prints, something more ethereal. He finished his mission, Tommy explained, following the prints with his fingers, like all the others. But guardians don't leave. They just change how they watch. Cooper wiped his eyes, years of police training warring with what he was seeing. "Still on duty, old friend." A soft bark echoed through the chapel, not from below, but from above. Just for a moment, they all saw him, Max, young and strong again, standing guard at heaven's door. "He says the others are safe now," Tommy translated. "Eleanor, the Archbishop, they can't hurt anyone anymore. The evidence is in the light." Sarah checked her phone. The live stream had reached millions. Across the world, people were already acting on what they'd seen. Other churches were being investigated, hidden accounts exposed, missing persons cases reopened. Father Michael clutched his cross. Not all sacrifices are in vain. No, Tommy agreed, standing straighter, but they have to be remembered, really remembered. Through the chapel doorway came the first news crews, drawn by Sarah's broadcast. They would want statements, explanations, sound bites about corruption and justice. But first, a small boy knelt in the dust of a broken church and drew a picture only he could fully see: a faithful dog leading lost souls home. Above them, the winter clouds parted. Where black snow had fallen, the morning sun now blessed the ruins of St. Thomas Chapel. And somewhere in the space between heaven and earth, a guardian kept his eternal watch. Some love, after all, is stronger than death itself. As FBI teams cataloged the wreckage, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender: Max Cooper, K9 unit, delayed delivery. "That's impossible," Cooper breathed. That's Max's old work account. Sarah opened the message with trembling fingers. It's dated 15 years ago. Set to deliver today. The email contained a video file and a simple message: when the chapel falls, they'll need this. Father Michael and Cooper gathered around the phone as Sarah pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from Max's old K9 unit camera. The date stamp showed the night before he disappeared. "Oh my God," Cooper whispered. "He was wearing his camera that night." The video showed Max following Bishop Morrison through the church tunnels. The bishop was clutching documents, looking over his shoulder frantically. They reached a hidden room where Eleanor and the archbishop were conducting a ritual. But it wasn't just any ceremony. "That's my father," Tommy said suddenly, pointing to a younger David Mitchell in the background, secretly filming everything. The truth unfolded in horrifying clarity. Bishop Morrison had discovered that the church's charitable organizations were fronts for human trafficking. David Mitchell, then a junior reporter, had been helping him gather evidence. But they'd found something worse than financial fraud. The video showed Eleanor using the ancient artifacts, the box, the whistle, the book, to literally bind people's souls to the church. Not for power, but for silence. Insurance, the archbishop's voice explained on the recording. "Those who might expose us can't speak if their souls are trapped." But Morrison and David had miscalculated. That night they thought they were just gathering evidence. They didn't know Eleanor had seen them. The video turned chaotic as Max tried to save them. The dog fought desperately, but Eleanor used the whistle. Morrison's soul was bound first. Then they turned on David. "Run," David shouted to Max. "Find Sarah. Show her." The video cut off. "Max escaped with the camera," Cooper said softly. "But they trapped him in the tunnels before he could reach us. All these years." "He was trying to keep his promise," Tommy finished. "To my dad." Sarah wiped her eyes. "But why deliver the video today, after all this time?" Father Michael's eyes widened. The date. Eleanor always said they needed to maintain the rituals for 30 years. Today marks exactly 30 years since they started. The binding would have become permanent, Cooper realized. All those trapped souls lost forever. But Tommy was smiling. "That's why Max waited. The spirits we freed, they weren't just showing themselves, they were breaking free. The 30 years ended at midnight." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another delayed email, this time from David Mitchell. "My love, if you're reading this, Max found a way. There's a safety deposit box at First National, number 616. The key is in Max's old collar." Cooper grabbed the collar they'd found in the debris. Inside the worn leather, a small key gleamed. "They thought they destroyed all the evidence," Father Michael said. "But they never understood what real faith means. A faithful guardian never stops watching, never stops trying." FBI agents approached with more findings from the tunnels. The full scope of the conspiracy emerged: decades of trafficking, hundreds of bound souls, millions in laundered money. But more importantly, they found closure for countless families who never knew what happened to their loved ones. Sarah held her son close. "Your father never abandoned us, Tommy. He died trying to save people." "I know," Tommy said. "Max told me. That's why he had to stay all those years in the tunnels. He was guarding more than evidence. He was guarding hope." Through the broken window, a warm breeze carried the scent of spring, impossibly early for December. Above them, Max's spiritual form kept vigil, joined now by David Mitchell and Bishop Morrison. The truth was finally free. But the story wasn't over yet. At First National Bank's safety deposit box 616 yielded more than evidence. Inside lay David Mitchell's personal journal, detailing a conspiracy far deeper than anyone imagined. The final entry was addressed directly to Judge Harrison. To my murderer, Sarah read aloud, her voice steady. I forgive you. Not for you, but for my son. Hate chains more than any ritual. Harrison, still in FBI custody, broke down when she showed him the journal. I didn't want to, he confessed, but they had my daughter's soul. Eleanor promised if I played my part. Tommy touched the man's handcuffed hands. In the chapel, the spirit in white behind Max. That was her, wasn't she? Harrison's eyes widened. Jessica? You saw her. Max freed her first, Tommy explained. She helped guide the others. She never blamed you. The judge's confession opened floodgates. Across the country, others bound by Eleanor's rituals came forward. Politicians, judges, business leaders, all controlled through captured souls of loved ones. The corruption wasn't just about money. It was about power maintained through supernatural blackmail. Father Michael discovered his own transfer to St. Thomas hadn't been punishment for Timothy's death. It was containment. They'd feared his gift for seeing truth. Timothy's death wasn't your failure, Cooper told him, reviewing old case files. It was your awakening. That's why they isolated you here. The FBI found Eleanor's records in the collapsed tunnels. Each bound soul had been meticulously documented. Among them, a familiar name, Detective James Cooper, Jr. Your son, Sarah whispered. That's why you never stopped searching. Cooper nodded, tears flowing freely. They took him to control Max and me. All these years I thought he was dead. He's free now, Tommy assured him. They all are. Max made sure. More revelations followed. Bishop Morrison's final report, hidden in the safety deposit box, exposed Vatican officials who'd known about the soul binding. The Archbishop's private files revealed decades of coordinated cover-ups across multiple dioceses. But with the dark truth came light. Churches worldwide began programs to help trafficking survivors. David's journal inspired new protection laws for whistleblowers. The Mitchell Foundation, funded by recovered corruption money, supported investigative journalism and animal welfare. Judge Harrison, facing life imprisonment, chose redemption. He testified against bigger players, helped locate other ritual sites, worked to free remaining bound souls. His courtroom became a place of healing as he heard victims' stories. At St. Thomas Church, Father Michael established the Guardians Ministry, its mission helping lost souls, both literal and metaphorical. The broken chapel became a sanctuary for those society had forgotten. Every faith has guardians he would teach. Some wear collars, some wear badges, some just have 4 legs and faithful hearts. Cooper retired from investigation to run a K-9 training program for rescue dogs. His first graduate, a one-eyed black puppy who showed up at the chapel one winter morning. Max sent him, Tommy insisted, for the next generation of guardians. Sarah's live stream footage and David's evidence sparked a global movement. Guardian Soft Truth trended worldwide as more whistleblowers came forward, more corruption crumbled, more souls found peace. But the most profound change was invisible to most. On quiet nights, when snow fell soft around St. Thomas Church, those with eyes to see would glimpse a familiar figure patrolling the grounds. Sometimes Bishop Morrison walked beside him. Sometimes David Mitchell, sometimes Jessica Harrison. And always watching over them all, a faithful dog with one clouded eye kept his eternal vigil. Love breaks every chain, Tommy would say, scratching the new puppy's ears, even the ones we can't see. The old powers had fallen, but the oldest power, love expressed through loyal hearts, remained unshakable. Just as Max had known it would all along. 1 year later, Winter returned to St. Thomas Church. The chapel, now restored, gleamed with new purpose. Where dark rituals once bound souls, stained glass windows now told stories of redemption. Each panel, designed by survivors, depicted guardians in various forms, human, animal, spirit. Sarah Mitchell, now head of the Guardians Truth Foundation, stood at the newly consecrated altar. Her latest expose had just won a Pulitzer, but more importantly, it had freed another dozen trafficking victims. David's work continued through her. Mom, Tommy called from the doorway, "They're here." The congregation filed in for a special service. Judge Harrison, granted temporary release from prison, sat in the back row, humbled but healing. His testimony had dismantled trafficking networks across 3 continents. His daughter Jessica's spirit sometimes visited, proud of his redemption. Cooper led a procession of K-9 handlers and their dogs, graduates of the Max Memorial Training Program. Each dog wore a special collar with a clouded eye symbol. They work worldwide now, finding lost souls both living and departed. Father Michael, his silver hair now matched by wisdom-filled eyes, began the service. The anniversary of Max's sacrifice had become a day of celebration, not mourning. A day to remember that light always finds a way. 1 year ago he spoke to the packed church. A faithful guardian showed us that true power lies not in ritual or control, but in unconditional love. Tommy sat in the front pew, the one-eyed puppy, now a strong young dog, alert beside him. They called him Hope, though Tommy sometimes caught him responding to Max's old police commands. Above the altar hung a simple plaque. "Greater love hath no guardian than this, to watch through the longest night, to guard the lost until found, to lead souls home." Sarah squeezed her son's hand as Father Michael continued. The live stream cameras rolled, witnessed now by choice, not chance. The world needed to remember. Today we honor not just one guardian the priest's voice carried to every corner, but all those who stand against darkness, those with badges and those with collars, those who walk in light and those who guide through shadow. Cooper's K-9 team stood at attention. Judge Harrison wiped quiet tears. Survivors held each other strong in their healing. And we remember Father Michael raised his hands in blessing, that even in our darkest hours we are never truly alone. A winter sunbeam pierced the new stained glass, casting a perfect circle of light on the altar. For just a moment, those with eyes to see glimpsed a familiar form, an old dog with a clouded eye, still standing guard at heaven's gate. Tommy smiled. Some guardians never truly leave. They just find new ways to keep watch. Outside, snow began to fall pure and clean, carrying no darkness, only light. The bells of St. Thomas Church rang out across the city, calling not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what was found. The longest night had ended. A new day had begun. As the service ended, Tommy walked to the spot where the chapel floor had collapsed a year ago. Now sealed with new stone, it bore an inscription, "Sacred ground guarded by faith, sealed with love." "Look, Mom," he pointed to fresh paw prints in the winter dust, prints that shouldn't be there yet appeared every morning. "Still checking in." Sarah smiled, touching the prints gently. Her camera captured the moment, not as evidence now, but as testament. Some stories needed to be told forever. Cooper approached with Hope, the young dog's badge gleaming. "Ready for graduation, kid?" Tommy nodded. At 9 years old, he'd become the youngest certified K-9 handler in the program's history. His gift for understanding dogs, for seeing what others missed, had only grown stronger. "Max taught me," he said simply. "He still does." Father Michael joined them, carrying something wrapped in aged leather. "It's time," he said, handing the package to Tommy. Inside was Max's old police collar, restored but bearing its battle scars. The clouded eye symbol now matched the stained glass above, a guardian's mark, recognized worldwide. "For the next generation," Cooper said softly. Tommy fastened the collar around Hope's neck. The young dog stood straighter, as if feeling the weight of legacy. Outside, snow fell on a changed world. The Mitchell Foundation had helped expose 40 similar ritual sites globally, each investigation led by K-9 teams wearing the clouded eye, each soul freed, each guardian remembered. Judge Harrison's daughter's spirit appeared less often now her father's redemption had helped her find peace. But sometimes on quiet nights she joined Max's eternal patrol, two guardians watching over their loved ones. Sarah's phone buzzed with a final delayed email from Max's account again, but this one was different. No evidence, no revelations, just a few simple words. Love watches, love waits, love redeems. Trust the guardians. They'll find you when you're lost. They'll guard you while you heal. They'll lead you home. Max. Tommy knelt beside Hope, both of them watching the space where others saw only winter air. But they saw more Max's spirit, young and strong, leading an endless patrol of guardian souls. Bishop Morrison blessing new protectors. David Mitchell watching over his family. All the victims now at peace, helping guide others home. Ready for your first watch, Tommy? Asked Hope. The young dog's bark echoed through the chapel, strong, clear, faithful, just like his predecessors. Father Michael raised his cross one last time. The light shines in the darkness, he began. And the darkness has not overcome it, the congregation finished. Sarah caught it all on camera, her son and his dog silhouetted against the winter light. Behind them, visible only in faith and memory, Max's eternal vigil continued. Some stories end, some guardians fall. But love pure, faithful, unconditional love that watches forever. Outside St. Thomas Church, snow fell like blessings on sacred ground, and in the space between heaven and earth, guardians kept their endless watch, leading lost souls home. Always home. In the end, me. Dear friends, Max's story of loyalty, sacrifice, and redemption has touched many hearts. If this tale of an extraordinary guardian moved you, please support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing it with your loved ones. Every like helps us continue bringing such meaningful stories to life. We'd love to hear your thoughts and emotions in the comments below. How did Max's journey affect you? Which moment brought tears to your eyes? And here's a question that's been on our minds. Would you like to hear what happens next? Should we explore Hope's journey as the new guardian? Let us know. Remember, true guardians never really leave us.